everyone. Thank you for joining Hudson River Sloop Clearwater for the third installment in our Clearwater Winter Virtual Learning Series. Tonight, we're going to be doing an overview called Who, Where, and How Much, Understanding the Hudson River PCB Fish Consumption Advisories. And I am both your host and your speaker tonight, so things will probably move pretty quickly. And Meg, we can turn it to the second slide. So to introduce Clearwater, for those of you who might not be familiar with us, we are a member-supported nonprofit organization whose mission is to protect the Hudson River by inspiring lifelong stewardship of the Hudson River and its tributaries through innovative education and advocacy programs. So you can see in the background, that is our sloop that we do both education and community sales on from around mid-April until the end of October. So I'll share some more information at the end about our sailing programs. And then just to establish some guidelines for the session tonight, if you haven't already, introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to know who you are and where you're calling. Do just that as a meeting and not as a webinar. So just be aware if your camera is on or off. I'm pinned to the bar, but if your camera is on, you can likely be seen. And if you're having any technical difficulties, please contact Meg Mayo or Chelsea in the chat. You can find the chat feature under More, which has the 3 little hyphens. You can see it on the right-hand side of the bar. And then also just on the left side, you can see both the mute and the stop video button as well. And so you can flip to the next slide. So PCBs, as many, probably potentially all of you know, are harmful to both humans and wildlife. In humans, there is evidence of both cancer and non-cancer health effects from PCB exposure. The human studies have a tendency to be a little bit more complicated than animal studies. However, the US EPA does classify PCBs as a probable human carcinogen, and there's been evidence of connections to PCB exposure and melanoma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, as well as breast cancer. There's also risk of liver cancer, and the role of PCBs in correlating with diabetes is also being investigated. In wildlife, there's also a variety of cancer and non-cancerous health effects. And then Meg, you can flip to the next one. This is my favorite slide because it really takes a very complicated set of guidance and really boils it down to the 3 things that you need to know when considering catching and eating fish from the Hudson River. So first of all, you need to think about who you are. And that means your age, and that means your biological sex. And then second to that, you need to think about what fish you're going to be consuming. There's different guidances for different species of fish. And then the third component is where you would like to fish in the river. So the further north that you go, the health advisories get more stringent. And then the further south you go, closer to New York Harbor, the more fish is able to be safely consumed. So as you're thinking about and approaching the fish advisories and considering consuming fish or crab from the Hudson River, you really do want to be keeping in mind who you are or who the other person fishing with you is, what fish you're interested in catching, and also where you're fishing. So keep that in mind as we go forward. So this slide, I know this probably looks a little bit small here, but essentially the river is broken into sections for the health advisories. And so to look at this tonight, we're going to be looking starting north and then moving our way south. And so at the top of my screen, you can see in the red section, so upstream of the South Glens Falls Dam, this is where the restriction is the heaviest. And so there's highly detailed and very specific information for consuming fish north of this point. And so go on there to see that very specific information from DOH. The next gradient down is this like medium orange color. So that's the upper Hudson. The upper Hudson ranges from South Glens Falls Dam to the federal dam at Troy. And this is a stretch where no one is to eat any fish at all. And then even more specifically in this region from Baker's Falls to the federal dam in Troy, the DEC has very specific rules about catch and release. So in addition to thinking about the fish consumption advisories, there's also additional restrictions on catch and release within that stretch. So then the mid-Hudson region, we're starting to like make it a little bit further down. The mid-Hudson region is considered from the federal dam at Troy down to the Rip Van Winkle Bridge at Catskill. And so in this section, we're now at a place where we can actually see how different populations can eat specific fish. So for the general population, which is considered children people over 15 who are not able to carry pregnancies, and then people over 50. So I know that sounds complicated, but that's how the general public is defined. It's people who cannot physically bear children, who are over 15, or people who can physically carry children in their bodies who are over 50. So for the general population, that's up to 1 fish meal a month of alewife, blueback herring, rock bass, and yellow perch. And then for sensitive populations, again, that is people under age of 50 who can bear children physically, and then anyone who is a child, so under 15, is to eat no fish. And then all other fish from the mid-Hudson, no one can eat those at all. So again, you can consume fish in this stretch. There are just 4, but the maximum is 1 fish per month for that general population. And so then Meg, we can go to the next slide. So this map, you'll see the map on the left again. So the lower Hudson section, as it's commonly spoken about in the Hudson Valley, is a little bit different, the way that you might know it, of what is referenced as the Hudson Valley, and the way that the sections work. But for the Department of Health Fish Advisory, the lower Hudson River is considered the span from the Rip Van Winkle Bridge, which is between Hudson and Catskill, all the way down to the Battery in New York City. So that's a really big stretch. And this is where you really see the limitations open up a little bit more. There's a lot more fish that can be consumed, but again, it's very, very limited. So no one is to eat walleye, white catfish, channel catfish, American eel, or gizzard shad from this stretch of the river. However, the general population, which is people who I'm trying to say this in a like a gender inclusive way, so just be gentle with me. So the general population is people over 15 who cannot physically carry babies, and then anyone who is over the age of 50. And so they can consume 1 fish meal a month of striped bass, smallmouth bass, largemouth bass, bluefish, brown bullhead, white perch, carp, rainbow smelt, goldfish, and Atlantic needlefish. However, sensitive populations still can take none and can consume no fish of those species safely. Blue crabs for the general population is up to 6 crabs per week, with the caveat, which we'll get into a little bit later, around not eating the green stuff, which is inside of the crabs and like the fatty parts. And also with the guidance of not reusing any of the liquids from within the crabs or the cooking water for other cooking purposes. And then all other species, the general population can have up to 4 fish meals per month. However, sensitive populations still cannot. So next slide. And so this just helps. I just want to make sure that it's clear. So women of childbearing age and kids under 15 shall eat no fish or crabs from the Hudson River under current conditions. Next slide. And then males older than 15 and women over 50 may eat certain fish depending on where and what are caught. However, when you are thinking about this, you have to think about how much your portion is, because all of these health advisories are created with focusing on us having a standard size of a meal, which is essentially one fish meal is considered 8 ounces. So when you go to the grocery store, you might throw a fillet and a half on per person to eat at your table at home normally. But if you're thinking about eating fish from the Hudson River, you really need to think of an 8-ounce portion as that one fish meal. So if we go back to three slides, Meg, and we look back at that the lower Hudson limitations. So for any of these up to one fish meal per month, that means 8 ounces total of fish. And then as we think about how we want to further reduce our exposure, you need to be thoughtful about how you're actually preparing the fish and really being cognizant to cut away the fat along the sides and the back and the belly, and then removing the skin, because the PCBs build up and are stored in that fatty tissue. So in order to best reduce your exposure or the exposure of your friends or family, you really want to be removing the fat and not eating the fat or the skin, and then also not cooking with the fat and also not cooking with the skin. And so, oh, sorry, can you go back, Meg, for a second? And then you also don't want to pan fry the fish as well, and do everything else that you can to remove additional fat. So baking the fish on a rack is a great option, so then the fat can drip away. So there's also guidance for blue crabs as well. You want to be sure to keep the crabs alive as long as you can. So you're only cooking live crabs. You want to use gloves or tongs when preparing. You also want to make sure that you keep raw crabs and cooked crabs separate, because otherwise there can be risk of contamination. You also want to make sure that you're really cooking crabs thoroughly before consuming them. And also removing that green brown stuff that you find within the crabs and not consuming that, because that's another location where the PCBs will concentrate. And then similar to fish, you do not want any of the cooking liquid. And so our next slide is the Department of Health has a variety of resources that are available, and they work really hard to reach as many people with the tools and the funds that they have. However, they could really use the help of community groups, individuals, clubs, in order to help spread awareness. So on the far left, you may have seen these if you visited a Hudson River town, but these are the PCB fish advisory signs. And so they come in Spanish, English, and Chinese, and they make them specific to each of the regions. And so those are to be displayed. They're aluminum signs, like 12 by 14, and they're available to municipalities and other Hudson River shoreline property owners in order to educate any members of the public or other folks who may go down to the shoreline and desire to fish. And so if you live in a community along the Hudson River, or you're visiting one, you're in a park, say in Pacific or Ossining, and you don't see these signs, it would be wonderful if you could help both Clearwater, but also your neighbors and the Department of Health, and reach out to that property owner, whether it be the county or the municipality or another entity, and request that they order some free signage. It is a really important visual to have, especially as we have a lot of tourists and other people traveling through our region. We have people moving here who may not be aware of the contamination or the risks. And so making sure that these signs are in every place that they possibly can be is really helpful. The Department of Health also maintains a database of around 140 locations from the federal dam in Troy all the way down to about Yonkers in Westchester County. And so every year they do, with a very small team, an impressive amount of sign inspections to see if they need to be replaced, to see if they've fallen down or blown away or whatever else have you. And so they also communicate with municipalities via phone calls and letters. However, sometimes a call from a constituent is what is needed to get the ball into the end zone. So if you can be an ally of both the Department of Health, but also Clearwater and your neighbors and help get more signs in place, that would be a huge value added. Also, if you're a member of like a boat club, a fishing club, a sloop club, other type of water recreation group, or someone who honestly hosts convenings and festivals along the shoreline, these are really great materials that are available for free. So there's the second image is the Hudson River Fish Advisory essentially booklet. And so it takes you through in a really comprehensive way the guidances for each of the regions, as well as information around health risks and how to minimize risk consumption. The third image on here is actually like a poster. So if you're a sloop club or if you have other types of waterfront property and you want to participate in some further education, but maybe don't have a place for display materials, or you don't have a location where people are often fishing, maybe you just have a building that overlooks the Hudson, you can hang up this poster. And then on the top right, which I realize is a little bit small, but it's basically a magnet with the graphic that we showed a couple of slides back. And so these are great. The Department of Health has these in several languages as well, and they're another really great tool and resource to give out. And then you saw this image on the lower right a couple of slides back too, and they have like a multi-page step-by-step guide on how to most safely break down a blue crab and prepare it in the safest way. They also actually have some like recipe videos online too, which are both fun and helpful. So Chelsea put the Department of Health website in the chat, so we welcome you to just grab that information. We'll also be sending it out in the follow-up email as well. Oh, and they also have coloring books. So if you have small people or you work with a school, definitely also think about getting the coloring books. I think they have them in both English and Spanish as well. And so to learn more and access free resources, the Department of Health website has all of these guides that I was talking about, as well as the request forms for the free outreach materials. And so definitely grab those links out of the chat. The Department of Health is that works on the fish advisory team is really small but mighty, and a big part of the education that happens around fish advisories is through like a modest grant program that Clearwater is lucky to get funding to do education like this through. And so thank you to the Department of Health for that funding. We're really grateful to be a partner and to be able to help spread the word about how to safely, who can and where fish can be safely consumed in the Hudson Valley. And then lastly, I feel like I moved through that all very quickly. Lastly, we just wanted to share some opportunities to get more involved with Clearwater. We have a really well-known sloop that hopefully most people watching this webinar live or that are tuning in via YouTube later on have sailed on before, or at least seen. So we sail from about the end of April through the end of October, and our sailing range is the whole tidal Hudson River. So we sail between New York City and the Federal Dam in Troy, and we have both educational sails as well as, so those are for like school groups, and then we also have community sails. So we have sailing programs taking place all days of the week, most times of the day if the sun is up. So we really welcome you to come aboard. It's a really unique way to experience the river and to see the Hudson River Valley, and also to learn from our crew and sing some sea shanties as well. It's a collaborative effort to sail the sloop and to haul the sail up. I went on for the first time last fall, and it was an absolutely magnificent experience, although I am not a singer by any stretch of the imagination. Even I very much enjoyed the sea shanties at the beginning. And then we also want to invite you to join us at our Spirit of the Hudson Gala, which will be taking place on Sunday, April 7th from 3 to 7 p.m. at the Garrison. We're going to be recognizing some really wonderful honorees, including Dr. Stuart Finley from the Carey Institute and Manna Jo Green, our former Director of Environmental Action. And we are also going to be debuting a new youth award that we're going to be giving out as well to a young man named Sael. And we just, our work wouldn't be possible without the community, the robust community that supports Clearwater. And it's just a great time to reflect and celebrate the past year, but also start to look forward to what this next year is going to mean as well. We also want you to be invited to support our environmental action efforts. I'm a department of one, so any additional support or capacity that you're able to provide as a volunteer or in terms of making a monetary contribution, we very much welcome that as well. And due to some time constraints tonight, unfortunately, I'm not able to take questions at this time, but I do welcome you to call me or to email me. My email address is jen@clearwater.org, and I'm happy to talk to you about PCBs in the Hudson River or any of the other issues that we work on at Clearwater. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we hope to hear from you soon or see you out on the river or down by the river as well. So be well, everyone. Thank you.